Good morning, Year 6. I'm really sorry this can't be a live video because I've got a meeting with Dojo this morning. However, this is going to be going through pages 24 to 31 of the grammar book. Okay, so hopefully you can do the questions before you see me answering them. If you haven't done so, pause the video now, watch it again later on. Okay, please don't send me any messages whilst you're doing it because I won't be able to reply, and it's I won't know where you're up to in your work. But if you want to send me some pictures of the work that you've done with your answers so I can have a look at them, that's fine, not a problem. Okay, should we get going then? First page, page 24 is about clauses, and then we've got some work on relative clauses and a bit of mixed practice. Okay, so clauses we've talked about in class. It says to put a tick in the correct column to show whether each group of words is a phrase, main clause or a subordinate clause. And there's a little hint. It says if you can't decide between a phrase and a subordinate clause, remember that subordinate clauses usually have a verb and someone doing the action. Okay, so he fell over makes perfect sense on its own. It's only three words long. However, that is a main clause. Out of pocket is just a phrase. Okay, it's not a main clause. It doesn't make sense on its own, and it doesn't really work as a subordinate clause. So I'm going to put a phrase for that one. Before we went out is a subordinate clause. It adds more detail to a sentence, but couldn't make sense on its own, and it has a conjunction there. Okay, so that's a subordinate clause. Saturdays are the best. Okay, makes perfect sense on its own, so that's another main clause. They jumped for joy. Okay, that makes sense on its own, so that's a main clause. When we saw him, okay, has a subordinating conjunction in there. Okay, so that's a bit of a clue. It's a subordinate clause. Okay, just a bit of information about subordinate clauses. They can be added to a main clause to add more detail. Okay, so you could, for instance, add this subordinate clause onto this main clause, and it would say they jumped for joy when they saw him, for instance. Okay, but when we saw him wouldn't make sense on its own. Okay, let's go on to number 2. It says to underline the main clause in each of these sentences. Okay, the first one's been done for you. Remember, the main clause makes sense on its own. And remember, be really precise with what you're underlining. Don't start underlining half of the word before it, or half of the word after it, or half of the word that you were supposed to underline. Be really precise. They drank a lot of water after they had played out in the sun. Okay, the main clause there is they drank a lot of water. Being really careful not to underline after. If I win the mud throwing tournament, we can have a party. We can have a party is the main clause there. If I win the mud throwing tournament is a subordinate clause. Okay, that could technically come after the main clause. So it would say we can have a party if I win the mud throwing tournament. Okay. But like we talked about in our punctuation session recently, putting that at the beginning just means we have to have a comma there. We left the room before he could start his boring story. We left the room is the main clause there. Before he could start his boring story, it's just giving more detail. Okay. I fed the pig while Lucy took the chickens for a walk. I fed the pig is the main clause there. We had to leave the zoo because the hippo had escaped. We had to leave the zoo, excuse me, is the main clause. When summer comes, we can go to the beach every day. We can go to the beach every day is the main clause. It makes perfect sense on its own. I don't like swimming outdoors unless it's very hot and sunny. I don't like swimming outdoors, got my pen working, is the main clause. Okay, right then, on to question 3 on page 25. You need to underline a subordinate clause in each of these sentences. So remember, subordinate clauses don't make sense without the main clause. Okay, they normally begin with a subordinating conjunction. We went to the park because I wanted to play football. Because I wanted to play football is the subordinate clause there. They will make a film after the TV series ends. after the TV series ends doesn't make sense on its own. Sorry, that's a subordinate clause. As long as the weather is nice, we're going to the fair this evening. As long as the weather is nice is the subordinate clause. You can sing along if you want. If you want is the subordinate clause. Okay, you notice that all these, okay, we're starting at those conjunctions. The music ended while they were dancing. While they were dancing is a subordinate clause. There's the conjunction. My computer has broken even though it's brand new. Okay, that's our subordinate clause there, even though it's brand new, and even though is the conjunction. If she does well in school, her parents are going to buy her a bike. If she does well in school. Okay, we've already had if before, haven't we? So that should be the clue there. Okay, let's move right along. Number 4 says to rewrite the sentence below, adding a subordinate clause, adding a comma if necessary. Okay, so really, I'd be looking for you to add a comma if you were putting the subordinate clause at the beginning. Okay, if you were going to put it at the beginning of the sentence. Okay, so I'm going to put in once the tide had gone out, they swam in the sea. But because I've started with a subordinate clause, I'm going to put a comma. Okay, you could have had they swam in the sea once the tide had gone out. Okay, in which case you wouldn't need a comma. Okay, because it would just be following the main clause. Number 5 says to write a main clause for each of these sentences and add a comma if necessary. Okay, so so the ones that you're going to need to add a comma for would be B, D, and E, because the subordinate clause is going to be coming at the. Sorry, I do apologise. The subordinate clause is already there when we got home, even though it was cold and so on. So the ones where the subordinate clause is at the beginning is where we're going to have to add a comma. So I'm going to do it right now before I add anything else in. Okay, the rest of them are just going to follow from the main clause, so don't really need a comma. And then I just need to come up with a sentence that makes sense. We could have lots of things for these, like on question 4. When we got home, we sat down exhausted. Even though it was cold is going to be a subordinate clause. We were all wearing shorts. Even though it was cold. Before we could say anything, they had run off. Because he'd lost his coat. Trevor was upset because he had lost his coat while she had a shower. Mary liked to sing while she had a shower. Okay, so make sure that the main clause that you're adding the main clause you're adding just needs to make sense with the subordinate clause. Okay. 26, on to relative clauses now. Relative clauses are just a type of subordinate clause that have a relative pronoun at the beginning. Okay, relative pronouns being things like where, that, when, whom, which, and so on. Okay. So, underline the relative clause in each of the sentences below. We should be able to take out the relative clause and what's left still makes sense. So the street where I live is in the centre of town. The relative clause is where I live. Okay, if I took that out of the sentence, it says the street is in the centre of town. Okay, so we know that we're correct. Could you pick up that box? That is over there, please. That is over there. Okay, not going to underline please, because if you took it out you could have could you pick up the box please. Okay, still makes sense. So you could potentially still underline it, but I would just stay safe. Do you remember the time when we went to the circus? When we went to the circus. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to have something following it every time. Do you remember the time? Okay, it would be the main clause. His parrot, which has blue and green feathers, wouldn't stop talking. This is an easy one because it's marked out with a pair of commas, so it's parenthesis. Okay, and it's starting with the relative pronoun which. Yesterday, I met the man who owns the bike shop. And the relative clause there is who. Okay, the relative pronouns we got where, that, when, which, who. The other one, which you see from time to time, is whom. Okay, a little bit trickier to explain when whom is used and not. Okay. Circle the relative pronouns in the sentences below. My best friend who lives next door to me is very funny. The relative pronoun starts the relative clause, so this one is who. That's the boy whose house is really big. Whose is the relative pronoun. My brother was late for tea, which surprised me. Which is the relative pronoun. The children loved the lessons that took place outside. That is the relative pronoun. Okay. Moving right along, number 3. Complete the sentences below by adding a relative clause in the space. Remember to add commas where they're needed. Okay, so the ones I'm going to add commas on are going to be the first 3 because the relative clause is sandwiched in between either part of the main clause. Okay, apart from the last one. Okay, so I'm just going to put them in now. Okay, I'm going to put the comma in once I finish writing the last word on each one. Okay. Okay, so the dog is always barking. The dog that lives next door, comma, is always barking. My uncle loves rock climbing. My uncle, who lives in Wales, comma, loves rock climbing. The classroom was full of children. The classroom, which was the oldest in the school, comma, was full of children. The weather was awful when we arrived. Sorry, no, yeah. That doesn't need a comma, that just needs a full stop. Okay, let's get on to question 4. Tick the sentences that would make sense without the relative pronoun. Now this one's a little bit misleading because when it says sentences, makes you think there's going to be more than one, but having read them through, I think there's only one. This book that I'm reading is very long. Okay, if I get rid of the relative pronoun, this book I'm reading is very long. Okay, now this is the one that is debatable. I still don't like the grammar, but you could say that makes sense on its own. The man who has blue eyes is quite tall. The relative pronoun is who. The man has blue eyes is quite tall. That doesn't make sense. The car which he bought is bright red. Get rid of which. The car he bought is bright red. That makes sense. She told us about the boy who trained fleas. She told us about the boy trained fleas. Doesn't make sense. So it's got the 2 there. The top one is the bit that I'm a bit of a grumble about because I don't think it's good grammar. It's probably better to have the relative pronoun in, but those are the 2 you'd go with. Number 5 says to rewrite the sentences leaving out the relative pronoun. So what I would be doing is rewriting them each time, okay? But what I'm going to do is just going to delete it from here, and then you can see which ones how you should be rewriting it. I thought the food that Tom had made was delicious. The relative pronoun is that. So it would read, I thought the food Tom had made was delicious. Whitney really liked all the people who she had met. Who is the relative pronoun? So Whitney really liked all the people she had met. It's about time that I did my homework. It's due tomorrow. It's about time, get rid of that, I did my homework. It's due tomorrow. Okay, so getting rid of those 3 there, okay, leaving the sentences, the rest of them would still make sense. Finally on this page, number 6, it says to use the words below, write 2 sentences that contain a relative clause and a relative pronoun. Okay. So I'm going to say the postman who was bitten by the dog ran away. Okay, so I've got comma, a pair of commas show parenthesis, either side of the relative clause. The relative pronoun is who. Mug and tea. My dad, who is 64, always likes tea in the same mug. Okay, so you could come up with lots of different variations of those there, but as long as you've got your relative clause and pronoun that makes sense in the sentence, that's what has really been answered those sort of questions. Okay, and they need to be punctuated correctly, A6. Okay, all too often the mistake people make is they concentrate so much on adding things like the commas that they forget to put capital letters and full stops. Okay, if that was a grammar test, it'd be wrong, wouldn't it? Okay, mixed practice then. So this is all going to be about the clauses and the sentences and paragraphs that we've been doing about the past couple of weeks. Okay, so we've got 4 more pages to go, but this should be really straightforward. Okay, so the first one we have to say whether we need to add the right punctuation, and then write whether the sentence is a statement, question, or a command. Okay, and the underlined words it's saying are for the next question, so I'm going to ignore that for now. Where have you been all afternoon is a question mark, questioning obviously. When the dog barked, everyone looked up. Full stop. Okay, that is just a statement. He tried to fix it, but it was beyond repair. That's just another statement. Statement, remember, statements just give us information. They don't ask us to do anything, it's not a question, and it's not authoritative, so it's not a command. If it's telling us to do it, it's a command. Stop doing cartwheels while I'm speaking. Okay, I'd still just use a full stop there, and that's a command. It's not really stop. If it was stop doing cartwheels and ended there, you may have used an exclamation mark. I just use a full stop for that one. Exclamation marks probably used quite a lot, sort of like when you're sort of informally writing. I know I use them an awful lot. However, in standard writing, exclamation marks aren't often used. Okay, they're rarely used, but still should be used, but not used as much as full stops. Why did they spend the morning in the house? That's a question, isn't it? I went to the party even though I didn't want to, and that's just a statement. Okay, question 1b is now looking at these underlined words, and it wants to tell us whether or not each one is a phrase, a main clause, or a subordinate clause. So the first one, all afternoon, it's been done for us, that's a phrase. The next one is when the dog barked. Okay, that starts with conjunction there, so that's a subordinate clause. When the dog barked. He tried to fix it, makes perfect sense on its own, so that's a main clause. While I'm speaking, okay? While is a conjunction, so that's a subordinate clause. In the house, that's just a phrase. I went to the party is a main clause. Okay, let's go on to question 2. Finish these sentences so that it makes sense. And this could be anything, but for it to be a question, it needs to end with a question mark. Why did you do that? Okay, I wouldn't make these incredibly long. I'd make them do the job and I can move on. Okay, I'm not looking for sort of terribly imaginative questions, okay, because I just want to keep it plain and simple so it just does the job. If I try and make it too long, you know, I could offer myself the spelling errors. So thinking if this was for an assessment, I just want to show that I know I can do a question. Is there anything I can do to help? Question mark. Have you seen have you seen my dog? Okay, that's all I need to do, but it needs to have a question mark. That'll be where people lose marks, because we don't put question marks. Okay, we just do the rest of it. Okay, without a question mark, it's not a statement, it's not a question, it's not a command, it's nothing. Okay, number 3 says write each of these commands as a question. So it says make my dinner, we just need to make it into a question. When can you make my dinner? And if we're making it a question, it needs a question mark. Okay, go to your room. How do I get to your room? No. Can I go to your room? Bring me the remote. Can you bring me the remote? Okay. Part B says write each of the statements as a question. Alex is tired. Okay, so we need to turn it into a question. Is Alex tired? Okay, they are early. Are they early? You are busy. Are you busy? So with each of those, we're just reorganising the words, aren't we? Part 4 says to draw lines to match each phrase with the correct type. Which one's an adverbial phrase? Which one's a noun phrase? Which one's a prepositional phrase? Okay, so an adverbial phrase has an adverb in it. I can see really happily being an adverb, so that's going to be my adverbial phrase. A noun phrase just contains a noun and more often than not an adjective, so that's the angry milkman. And a prepositional phrase contains a preposition which says where or when things are compared to something else. So that would be over. So over the hill is my prepositional phrase. Okay. Part 5 says to rewrite the noun phrases below, adding 2 adjectives to each phrase. Okay, so I just need to keep it a noun phrase like the angry milkman up here. Okay. Fancy new computer. Now, 2 adjectives before the noun, you're going to have a comma. Okay, a horse, a handsome black horse. Remember, colours are adjectives, okay? But because we've got 2 adjectives, we need a comma, okay? That would be what they'll be looking for there. Not just the adjectives, knowing you have to put a comma to separate them. And the last part says to rewrite the phrases below, making them into shorter noun phrases. Okay? An actor who is handsome and talented. A handsome talented actor. Okay, this one's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words. Mine's now got 4. The mountain which is tall and rocky. The tall, rocky mountain. okay, needs to have a comma, okay, to separate the two adjectives. Nearly done, moving right along to page 30 and 31. Okay, question 6 says to write a sentence with a prepositional phrase in it. Okay, remember prepositions, we had over, for an over the hill, tell us where something is or when something is compared to something else. Okay, so this one just has to have a prepositional phrase in it. If you've got a preposition, it would probably like to have a prepositional phrase. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to say the book was placed on the shelf. Okay, my prepositional phrase being on the shelf. Okay, it just tells me where the book was. Okay, write a sentence with an adverbial in it. Okay, now you know I'm gonna be really cheeky because they've already given me an adverbial phrase here, that one we have really happily. Okay, so I'm just going to use that to start off a sentence. Okay, so really happily. I celebrated my results, full stop. Okay, if you're writing a sentence, capital letters, full stops, capital letters, full stops. Okay. Number 7 says to tick or cross to show whether the relative clause is underlined correctly. He owns the hotel. Is that a relative clause? Does it start with a relative pronoun? No, the relative clause is which is closing noun, so that's not a relative clause. That's the teacher who cycles to school. Who cycles to school? Yep, starts with the relative pronoun, so that's a relative clause. She wore a mask which was terrifying. Which was terrifying? Is that a relative clause? Does it start with a relative pronoun? Yes. I don't like the lamp that is in the living room. The lamp that is in the living room. Okay? It's not a main clause, but it's not a relative clause. It doesn't start with a relative pronoun. Okay? So that's not a relative clause. Number 8 says to rewrite the sentence below, adding in the relative pronouns that are missing. We went to a museum, had a dinosaur display. So it's going to be in there. Okay, so it's going to be, we went to a museum that had a dinosaur display. We met a man, knew a lot about dinosaurs. It's going to be in there, isn't it? And the missing relative pronoun is going to be who. We met a man who knew a lot about dinosaurs. Okay, and lastly on this page it says to rewrite the sentences below, removing the relative pronoun from each one. Okay, so rather than rewrite it, I'm just going to delete it and you can see which one I've got. The display that they had made was very interesting. Okay, that is the relative pronoun. It would make sense. The display they had made was very interesting. We drew pictures of the dinosaur that we saw. Okay, that is relative pronoun again. We drew pictures of the dinosaurs we saw. Okay, hopefully you've got those as well. Nearly done now. Number 9 on page 31 says each of these sentences has a main clause, MC, and a subordinate clause, SC. Underline each of the parts and label them as in the example below. After Alex won, we all celebrated at the bowling alley. Okay, after Alex won is the subordinate clause, so they put SC above that. And we all celebrated at the bowling alley is the main clause, so they've got MC above that. So, on each of these, let's underline the main clause, the subordinate clause. So, if you let me is the subordinate clause, and I will dye your hair blue is the main clause. That makes sense on its own. They watch rugby every weekend because they love sport. I'm just going to say what the subordinate clause is first. That's this bit. Starts with a conjunction like if and after. So that means that they watch rugby every weekend is the main clause. We have to wait until Shuri has woken up from her nap. We have to wait is the main clause. The subordinate clause is until Shuri has woken up from her nap. Okay, doesn't necessarily mean that the main clause has to be longer. Okay, it's just the main clause makes sense on its own. You're not getting a bigger slice because it wouldn't be fair. Okay, so like with until, we've got because here, that starts off a subordinate clause, the conjunction, so there we go, there's a subordinate clause, which means you're not getting a bigger slice is a main clause. Remember, main clauses make sense on their own. While she was watching TV, I hid the remote in the cupboard. I hid the remote in the cupboard is the main clause, it makes sense on its own. While is a conjunction, that starts off my subordinate clause, while she was watching TV. Okay. Last but not least, it says to read the text below and write each underlined part next to the correct description. So it's got the noun phrase, the tiny mouse, that's already been done. We need to look for a relative pronoun, a prepositional phrase, a main clause and a subordinate clause. As Kay poured herself some cereal, something small and furry fell into the bowl. It was a mouse. Kay couldn't believe it. Her mum, who was scared of mice, screamed when it jumped out of the bowl and ran across the table. Kay watched the tiny mouse as it tried to escape. She opened the kitchen door and the mouse ran outside gratefully. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the easy one here. A relative pronoun is one word. Okay, and I know that from other things, my relative pronoun is who. And you know what? After I've done it, I'm going to cross it out. Then I know not to ignore it for the others. So I've got 3 left and I've got 3 here. I know that a prepositional phrase tells me where or when something is. Okay, so out of the bowl would make sense there. So we're left with a main clause and a subordinate clause. The difference being that main clauses make sense on their own. So I've got as Kay poured herself some cereal and she opened the kitchen door. The bit that makes sense on its own is she opened the kitchen door. Which means that the last bit, the subordinate clause, is as Kay poured herself some cereal. Okay, there we have it. Okay, 4 pages. Okay, and we're up and roll it. So, well done if you've managed to have a go at that. If there was any questions which you didn't understand, by all means message me, although I won't be able to get back to you till later on. And just put a little note as to which question you're referring to, the page number and the question number, and then I know which one to look out for. Okay, I hope you're all well, enjoying what's hopefully another sunny day, and I will see you tomorrow for the maths chat. Remember, this week there's not going to be a lesson on Friday because it's the bank holiday for the VE Day celebrations, the 75th anniversary. So Thursday session will be the topic chat rather than punctuation. Okay, for the maths tomorrow, I posted the link on Dojo. Okay, because you may not have the sheets at home, so you can see the silver, gold and platinum links onto Dojo. Okay, let me know if you can't get onto them, I'll send some links out. Okay, other than that, I hope you have a good day. Okay, keep safe, Mr. Hyde.